So, hello everyone, and welcome back to the NeuroCalm Fatigue Summit. Again, I'm your host, Anna Greer, and I'm delighted to have with me today Dr. Keesha Ewers, the foundation of the Academy for Integrative Medicine and Functional Sexology, an integrative medicine expert, autoimmune disorder expert, doctor of sexology, psychotherapist, board certified functional medicine provider, Ayurvedic practitioner, medicine woman, best-selling author, speaker, and not least, mother of four. Fantastic to have you here, Keesha. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
It's absolutely delightful to meet you. Keisha, would you mind telling the audience just a little bit of your own story briefly?
Sure. I always find that those of us that are doing the work that you're doing and I'm doing always have a very personal reason why we got here, and I'm definitely no exception to that. I started out as a registered nurse in a hospital when I was 19 years old, and was kind of one of those high intensity adrenaline junkies in the places that I worked, the intensive care unit, and I liked to skydive. And then I started having children, and I wanted to be the most perfect mother possible, perfect wife, and ran marathons and drove myself mercilessly. I was really kind of a crazy type A perfectionist and a people pleaser to boot. And when I turned 30, I wound up with a lot of what my patients describe the same thing, where they'll think like all of a sudden, that you're sick. And that's kind of how it manifested for me too. But that's not true. It had been coming on for about 20 years, but I had been silencing it with a variety of different things, like lots of ibuprofen. And, so one day I woke up and I had 30, well, 10 extra pounds of weight on me. And it was all over my joints, and they were red and they were inflamed. And it was like someone had taken the batteries out of the Energizer Bunny. And I was just flattened and went in to see a doctor. And in the course of the history taking, she said, "Do you have autoimmune disease in your family?" And I said, "Well, I think my grandfather had it. I never knew him, and he was in a wheelchair at the end of his life, and he died before I knew him, and actually died at the age I am right now, which is 57. And so with rheumatoid arthritis." And she said, "Well, that's what you have. And here are two prescriptions, one for methotrexate and another for a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And when you get worse, come back, not if." And so that's still what rheumatologists are telling people all around the world, 30 years later. So that's a little crazy to me that, and at that time too, I stopped her and I said, "Well, hang on just a second, is there anything else I can do? Because I'm very disciplined. I make my own food. If you give me something to do, I'll do it." And she said, "No, this is genetic. This is it." So it was like this really interesting, oh, if it's in your genes, that's the end of the story. And again, that assumption prevails widely, although we now know that there's evidence that's kind of irrefutable about the process that we really go through in the upregulation of our genes called epigenetic lifestyle factors, right? And so on my way home, I remember thinking, there has to be some other way I can get at this. And it was the first time I'd ever considered other paradigms. In fact, I'd never even known that there were other paradigms. I always tell my patients and students, if an herb had bitten me on the bottom, I wouldn't have known what it was. It was just so foreign to me. And so I went home and I looked on the internet and PubMed, where we keep our medical research, and was looking for ways to treat RA outside of cancer fighting drugs like methotrexate. And I found a very compelling article on yoga and autoimmunity and went to my first yoga class the next morning. And, in the course of that, where yoga teachers, as they will, you're holding your posture and they walk through the studio, he started mentioning this enough about this word Ayurveda that I got interested and went home and again looked that up. And as I was reading about Ayurvedic medicine, which is this 10,000-year-old sister science of yoga, I thought, oh, this is so interesting. Like all those years ago, they realized that we are all different people, which again was very new for me. You know, the way that we're trained in the Western medical model is that here's this list of drugs that fix different disease categories. And then here's the list of side effects that you have to learn and drug interactions. It's not getting at the root cause. Like here's what might have caused the disease process, right? So Ayurvedic's designed just the opposite of that. And in fact, this is where our science goes awry. We're so proud of our double blind, random controlled studies where we don't know who's in the pool. And yet we don't know who's in the pool. And so we don't know like what genetics they carry. We don't know their dosha mixture. And so then we extrapolate whatever findings are there into the rest of the population and say, well, this applies to everyone. And that's just couldn't be further from the truth. And then the other thing I learned was Ayurvedic medicine, you know, says the autoimmune disease is undigested anger. And this idea that you have to digest your feelings and your experiences and your memories, you know, your emotions, the same way you would digest your food, that was completely foreign to me. And I thought, oh, and then also followed quickly with, but I'm not an angry person. Followed quickly with, maybe that's a problem that I can't recognize anger in myself and that I strap on my running shoes and, you know, run for miles if I feel like I need to blow off steam instead of really getting underneath like why I'm angry. And so this was all like, okay, I wonder. And so I started learning how to meditate. I started becoming a yoga, you know, training to become a yoga teacher. And one day this word autoimmune was coming through and dancing in front of my third eye space. And I remember like finally looking at it and going, okay, auto means I'm attacking myself. There's nothing outside of me that's to blame for what's going on right now. If, you know, if this way that we think about it is auto, that means I'm basically killing myself in a societally acceptable way. So when's the first time I wanted to die? And why? Because I certainly don't now, you know? And so instead of how do I get out of this as quickly as possible, I thought settle into it and ask questions like that. And so in my meditation, I went back and started looking for, is there a time in my life that I actually wanted off this planet? And sure enough, I landed on this 10-year-old little girl version of myself that was being sexually abused by the vice principal of the elementary school I was attending. And I thought, oh, she wanted off the planet. She didn't understand what was going on. I had tried to tell like a couple of teachers, and I had tried to tell my mom. My dad was out to sea, he was in the Navy. I didn't have the right words, I'm sure. Like, I was very sheltered, lived in Japan for a lot of my childhood. I was raised with no television. It was 1975, you know, different time period. And I thought, I don't think I even knew the word sex or abuse or molestation, like any of it. And the vice principal was telling me, you know, I was a bad kid and that's why this was happening. And so I thought this has to be connected. And sure enough, science tells us that it is. And, you know, that came along much later. But that realization that these two things, I'll bet this message to my cells happened when I was 10. And here I am 20 years later and bearing the fruit of it. And my body's saying, okay, if you want out, you can go. And so that was really fascinating because I thought, well, I have 4 small children. I don't want to go. I really love my life. So what now? And so the what now was to go and heal that childhood trauma, which I just dove into, you know, and said, this is what I need to do. And my RA was gone in 6 months and my energy level was back to where I was used to it being. And I had started learning, and it was over the course of about, I don't know, from then until now, and then probably till I die, that I'm still harvesting the, you could call it post-traumatic growth wisdom from that, and still integrating, you know, the learnings from what that little girl with her undeveloped brain, you know, our brains aren't fully developed till we're 26 years old. They don't have a prefrontal cortex that's online yet, right? And so the meanings and the beliefs that are created in the face of childhood experiences, we carry forward with us unless we go back and re-examine them. And so any kind of a disease process like this, or the loss of a marriage, or, any other financial ruin, losing a job, gaining a job, having a promotion, but so stressed you can't even do anything, an eating disorder, an addiction, name it, weight issues, low libido, fatigue that won't go away. These kinds of things are opportunities in Joseph Campbell's paradigm of the hero's journey to really listen to the call and say, okay, there's a piece of information here missing in my consciousness, my conscious mind, that I don't have yet. Let's go get it. Let's go find out what it is, right? Find a mentor. That's what I did. And that's what we're doing right now, is providing mentorship. And then take that information as it pertains to me, go into my cave, integrate it with where I've already been, what I know, what my life purpose is, come out of the cave. And then life has this gorgeous way of providing opportunities to practice. And you practice and practice and practice until you gain mastery, which is where I am now, right, on that issue. And then you become the oracle or a teacher for others. And then, interestingly enough, this is what really makes my patients and students mad, it will start again and you'll get another challenge. And then it's time to go again.
Too true.
Not a one and done. That's what human life is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Keesha, what were the specific modalities or techniques that you used to metabolize that anger to the point where you switched on healing in that way?
The specific technique was, I call it, so I conducted a study for my PhD work when I was in grad school in 2013, and it's called the Healing Unresolved Trauma Study. And, we only investigate what we're supposed to learn. And so I was really looking at, why did the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, the ACEs study that was done in 1995 to 1997 by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, why, when, they found that women particularly, but anyone that undergoes an adverse childhood experience, like a capital T trauma, such as sexual abuse, domestic violence, neglect, abandonment, psychological, spiritual abuse, anything where a parent is addicted to a substance, mentally ill, incarcerated, dead, these big capital T traumas. If you experience one of those, you have an ACEs score of 1 before the age of 18. If you experience 2, an ACEs score of 2. What they discovered with this very large cohort, it's almost 3,500 people in their study, Kaiser Permanente enrollees, they discovered that, the higher your ACEs score, the higher your chances in adulthood for obesity, sexual issues, all the chronic illnesses that we have today, cancer, autoimmunity, genetic expression of disease. And what was really compelling to me is mental illness and the lack of motivation to engage in self-care consistently. This is what you could say is another word for that, is self-sabotage. So, when I did the HURT study, I was looking at this. And what I realized as I was, saying, well, why is it that this is true? And mapped the brain, and, and what I was asking is, women that had had low libido, what was going on with them? And it correlated with the ACEs study, interestingly enough, because it turns out that when you have a childhood experience, and it doesn't need to be a capital T trauma, it can be a lowercase t trauma, anything where you've experienced betrayal or rejection. And everyone has. So everyone's had trauma multiple times, right? And I can talk about examples of that. And then you're going to have a feeling first when you experience that. So maybe it's fear, maybe it's anger, maybe it's sadness, hurt, pain. Then your from there going to have a nervous system response from your sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze. Children always have freeze. You're not autonomous, you're not powerful, you're not fighting, you're not fleeing, you're freezing. So you freeze that into your system. And then immediately, I mean, it's really quick, you're going to make up a meaning to go with what just happened. And in my case, if we track my herd, I call it tracking in 5th grade, then when the intercom would go off in the corner of my 5th grade classroom to call us to Pledge of Allegiance, provide announcements, I would go into fight, like freeze state. I called it panicked rabbit, because that's also how I got called to the office. And so like Pavlov's dog, right? So from there, you're going to create a belief about what's going on. And in my case, it was, well, I must be doing something wrong. So from there, you're going to create an adaptive behavior that goes with your belief. Mine was perfectionism. I better get it right or I'm not going to survive. In the hurt model, there's a bifurcation from that initial hurt loop. I call it your initial hurt loop, where all of that is put in place. Now you have a pattern. And so the bifurcation is, as you go into adulthood, if you have what I call a maladaptive memory processing loop, in the middle of that loop, it says unwilling or haven't yet engaged in self-confrontation. And so there are automatic negative thoughts, rumination on those automatic negative thoughts, judgment that comes in around those automatic negative thoughts. You reinstigate your sympathetic nervous system in the same way you did when you were a child, and you still get those same feelings coursing through your body, and that leads to disease. On the other side, if you are willing, it's an adaptive memory response loop. Now you're digesting it, right? So if you're willing to engage in self-compassionate curiosity and self-confrontation, then there are a variety of techniques that you can use. But the first thing that's essential is that willingness to say, wherever I go when I'm unhappy, I'm present. So therefore, it actually isn't about my past experience, about the present person in front of me, about the government, the whatever, right? The EPA, the FDA, none of the things, right? Those are not the cause of what is triggering me. It's actually the way that I've patterned myself that's triggering me. The first technique is the willingness to engage in self-confrontation with compassionate curiosity, and to say that, like, oh, I'm the one that has the patterning. And yes, it is because of something that I was exposed to that I didn't deserve. It wasn't my fault, right? It's not something that I want to carry forward. So now I get an opportunity to go back with my fully developed adult brain, my compassionate wisdom heart, and do a bunch of work. And so on that loop, I've put in things like, now you can do somatic healing, EMDR, brain spotting, hypnotherapy, Enneagram. I use all of those. I use plant medicine. I give retreats using plant medicine and non-plant medicine retreats. Like, I use all of these things, internal family systems. And it's where are people on their path, and then I pick the thing that will match them. So I work on that physical, emotional, mental, spiritual level together.
Yeah,
right.
I love it. I love the complexity, sensitivity in it, and the emphasis on really deep self-attunement, which is a theme that's come up a fair bit with some of the interviews. One of the modes of self-attunement that we haven't touched on in other interviews, which I think you will be able to speak to in a unique way, is in the realm of the sexual self. And I know this is a complex area for people with complex fatigue conditions, and I would absolutely love it if you could speak to that, because absolutely no one else has. And I think it would be really, really valuable for those listening to really hear something about sexual self-attunement and sexual expression and energies for healing.
Well, I'll start with defining how I think about this energy, sexual energy. So in my doctoral work, I was contemplating all of the people that had come into, I have a TED talk about this, a TEDx talk called Have You Heard from Your Libido Lately? So you can check that out too. But it was like I had all these people coming into my practice asking for bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And when I would ask really simple questions like, so when's the last time you had a libido level that you were happy with? I'd often have people crying in front of me. Or another one that would bring tears really rapidly is, do you like your partner? Because they'd never been asked these questions when they saw their medical providers. And so, and to me, they're so obvious. It's like, well, do you even like the person you're having sex with? You know? And you know, oh, he had an affair 5 years ago and I really love him and I've forgiven him, but I haven't wanted to have sex with him ever since, you know, or I never have had libido that I've been happy with. And, you know, I would say, you know, hormones aren't going to fix those things. There were so many things that had narrative stories around them that hormones don't fix. And so I started going into, as I do, you know, the medical research to see what I could find. And there was nothing. And I thought, oh, okay, well, this seems like a pretty obvious question to investigate. And so that's when I went back to school and did this doctoral study. And what I just, you know, discovered was there are two kinds of low libido. One is acquired low libido. So you used to have a libido level. You used to be engaged happily in self-pleasure or pleasure with another. And then it's now gone. Or innate low libido, which means you never have had libido for self or other. Now, the other definition that it made this question arise for me was that of libido. And I thought, you know, in Ayurvedic medicine, they have this term called ojas, OJAS. And ojas is one of the three energies, prana, tejas, and ojas, that are essential for cellular communication, replication, you know, and for you to have vitality, energy. Ojas is life force vitality. And when you are depleted of it or it's gone, you actually die. Like that's the life-giving force that the mitochondria, you could say, live with. And so I thought, gosh, you know, you could think of as libido as ojas. We don't have a word for ojas in the medical English language. And so I thought, what's the closest thing I can find? And I thought libido, it's desire, it's passion for life. And so when I started looking up the word libido, it comes from Latin desire, desire, which means actually from the stars. And I thought, well, this is perfect. Like, this is really what I'm talking about when I'm not talking about necessarily intercourse and sex when I say libido. I'm talking about life force vitality that is your really birthright from the stars. And if you're a woman listening to my voice, you actually have the only body part designed only for pleasure. You're it. Like men don't have that. They have a multi-use organ. You have a clitoris that's only for pleasure. So, you know, this is our birthright. So if we're designed this way, then what gets in the way of that life force vitality? So I used to think in terms of like, what's blocking the flow? What's blocking you from being in flow state, right? And so that's how I think about libido, to make it a little broader than intercourse. So, or orgasm. I mean, I think that a lot of times when people ask the question about sex, they have two metrics that are involved in their minds, and it can be sexual desire and it can be orgasm. And, you know, it also involves very much intercourse. And if we broaden that to, I don't care if you're having sex, but I do care that you have passion for your life, that you have vitality, that you get to choose how to use. This kind of energy is huge. It's big. It's co-creative with the divine. And so when we talk about like how to self-attune sexually, I would ask that the self-attunement comes through, what is it that I love? So often, and I'm going to say this again about women, but I think it happens with men too, that being a woman, this is like my own personal experience. is so often I see women caregiving to the extinguishment of their own ability to self-attune to their own needs.
Yes.
So then there's resentment and frustration that will build up, right? And sometimes at the end of the day, if that's when sex is happening inside of a relationship, it's like everybody else has taken it all, and I just need you to leave me alone. And in a relationship, what can happen is David Snarsh calls this low desire, high desire partner imbalance. And so if one partner, and it can be the female, it doesn't need to be male, right? It can be the high desire partner for sex, then, you know, they now don't have any power in the relationship, because the low desire partner has all the power about when you're having sex, how you're having sex, if the lights are on, what you're going to do in that intimacy time. And that high desire partner can get resentful because they have zero power in this. So then they will become the low desire partner in something the other one wants. It could be emotional connection, right? It could be exercise. It could be going to see the in-laws. It could be the way money is spent. And so there'll be this imbalance that becomes more and more polarized as high desire partners not getting their needs met in the thing they're a high desire partner for, right? And so if this isn't balanced by being able to self-attune, I always say that one of the biggest, I use a bad word here, so I won't use now, like mind scramble that
I don't know what the word would have been.
That happens is, you know, if you really love me, you would know what I want.
Yeah.
And so the idea of self-attunement is vital on all levels. It isn't just how you do sex, is how you do everything.
Yeah.
So I always say, like, scrape you off the ceiling sex is coming from scrape you off the ceiling self-awareness and communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so not finding, like, you may find that your finances are a mess, you know, and you don't look at it, and you don't want to keep a spreadsheet, or you don't want to and I'm messy with finances, so I can say, like, yeah, I'm one of those people. And so when I think about it that way, then I'll be messy in other things too. So then if I clean up one area, then I find my mind goes to cleaning up all areas. And so becoming, I call it stable, awake awareness, that you don't go into what I think of as lazy mind ever. You know, lazy mind means you stop taking responsibility for your inexperience. You begin placing all of the responsibility on people and experiences outside of you, which is an adolescent arrested developmental phase. You're supposed to go into locus of control, goes internal when you're an adolescent instead of external, where you get all of what you do from the people outside of you until that point. And so if you are not adept at self-attunement, it means that you have arrested development, and that's okay. Our whole culture does, you know, like, there's a lot of blaming and shaming that happens. And so when you've had trauma, sometimes that developmental task did not happen. And so that's another thing that needs to be built. And sex is a really great doorway that can happen through, or it might be too hot, right? And you can do it through a different doorway.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
It might be you need to learn how to clean out your closet.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and stop hoarding.
It's about that development of that central skill, isn't it, Keisha?
It is.
Said the stable self, you know, the awakened, stable sense of self-attunement that threads through everything, and about, I guess, again, it's repatterning through habituation, through practice. We're running out of time, so I want to thank you for an amazing conversation. I think one key thing that's really come out for people with fatigue to really hear is this sense of their willingness to go in, to attune to self, to face the things that might be uncomfortable, but to know that that's the doorway to healing, and to understand that we have these capacities, powers, and energies, that when we go into that space of self-attunement and we take the locus of control, we then step into healthy functioning.
Right. And we do it, you can do it with a guide next to you, you know, I mean, you don't have to do it on your own. And you do it with the willingness to treat your your process as though you're healing a very small child.
Yeah,
You know,
beautiful.
so if you're a parent, then you know how to do that. You speak kindly and gently and tenderly to a child that's frightened. And if you're not a parent and that doesn't come easily to you, then you know, pretend like it's your puppy, or, you know, like, how are you going to treat this little one inside of you with tenderness, compassion? So when I say self-confrontation, it's not self-incrimination
Yeah.
or recrimination or denigration, right? You have to take it a step at a time with practice. You've been practicing other ways of being your whole life. You're quite masterful at them. And so you have to be willing to say, okay, step by step.
Yeah, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And the development of that beautiful, soft, tender inner gaze, such a lovely way of framing it. Thank you so much, Keesha. I want to thank you on
Thank
behalf
you.
of the audience. Thank you.